Hello everyone, and welcome to what will be a new series on my channel where I'm going to be reviewing designs for Ionic applications that have been sent in by people who watch this YouTube channel or follow my blogs or follow me on Twitter or wherever you might know me from. You'll be able to submit a application, one page from an application, and then I'm going to review that on screen, make some changes, and see if we can make it look a little bit nicer and maybe work a bit better for the users. So the general idea is that I'll just be looking at this on screen, making a few tweaks, maybe a few suggestions, talking about a few UX concepts, things like that. I do want to stress that design and user experience and things like that aren't really things you can just slap on at the end and everything's going to be great. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. We're going to spend maybe 15-20 minutes just making a few quick tweaks to some applications. But although that probably isn't the approach you should take in general, I think you can get a lot of value just from pushing your application just a little bit more and making a few of these tweaks. You can get a lot of value for just a little bit of work. So yes, there's definitely something to be gained from spending a little bit of time doing stuff like this, but just keep in mind that design and UX is something you should be considering from the start when you're building your application, and it should be an integral part of what you're doing if you really want to build an application that's really good. So if you want to submit your own application to this series for me to review, keep in mind obviously I'm not probably going to be able to get to everybody's designs, but I'll leave some information in the description. So just have a read of that to see how you can participate in this series. Okay, so I have the first application I'm going to review on screen now. We're just going to focus on this one page. We're not going to worry about the functionality of the application or anything like that. We're just going to look at this one page and we're going to make some interface changes here. And so this one was submitted by Justin. So thanks for sending this one in, Justin. It's not easy to have someone, critique your work on screen. So thank you for participating. So I just want to give you a bit of context about Justin's application here. He sent me in his email just a quick description of what the application does, which of course is important if we want to make some user experience improvements. So he says, this is a simple application I built for my parents as they love to travel and play car games. As you'll see, this one is US based. You'll find different state tags on cars on your trips. And as you do that, you mark them as found. So we're looking for license plates on cars. As they're spotted in real life, you would mark them as seen on this application. It says once you have marked a state as found, you then receive 3 trivia questions about that state. All of that leads up to your total score for the trip. There is an additional point modifier in this game. The farther you are from the center of the state you find, you also get a bump to your score. So my US geography isn't fantastic being an Australian, but I assume by that means if you're in Los Angeles and you see some New York license plates, you're probably going to get a pretty big bump to your score for that. Okay, so that all seems to make sense. Bit of a fun application. Maybe not something you're too worried about the UX within this case, since it is, as you mentioned, an app for your parents, but still we'll treat this as like a proper application you want to deploy to thousands of people or whatever. So we can just try and learn some things from this application. So if we look on the screen here, we can see at the top, looks like we have just a title there. We have a refresh button, which resets the game. If I just click on one of these states here, if I click on Alaska, for example, I'll say I've found that tag, and then I get this quiz and go through the quiz. I'm not actually trying to answer the questions here. And then Alaska is marked as being found. And if we hit refresh, that's going to reset that. So we've got that reset button. We have a list of, our score up here, how many states we found, how many facts we've answered, and I assume the total score for the application. And then each of the states has a button to mark it as found and some information about your score on each individual state as well. So the functionality of the application is kind of secondary to what we're doing here, but we do need to understand what we're trying to do in order to make appropriate interface and user experience decisions. So what I'm going to do now is just focus on some things that stand out to me, and I'll make some quick changes. I'll just be modifying the interface a bit. I'm not going to worry too much about making this work. So sorry, Justin, if I'm breaking your application by doing this, but we're just going to focus on just the interface. So one of the first things that stands out to me is this states facts and the total at the top here. It is sort of attached to the header area here, so it's going to follow us as we go up and down, which isn't a huge problem, especially on big screens like an iPhone 10, like I have it set to at the moment. But on, say, a Galaxy, which is a bit smaller, that header section is going to be taking up quite a bit more of the screen real estate. So if you do have something that is going to be following you around like that, you want to make probably sure it's something that the user is going to be using a lot and it's worth sacrificing that screen real estate. So what I might do to solve this situation is I don't think the current score is something you need all the time. Again, this is just my assumption, maybe you disagree with that, but since it isn't something that needs to be seen and visible 100% of the time, we don't need to interact with this all the time, I don't think it makes much sense to have it in the header here. So what I would do is either take this out of the header and just put it in the content area at the top. So it will just sit at the top of the content area here. So when you scroll, that's going to go away. And then if you want to see the score, you could scroll back. I would also change the styling a bit here, make it look a little bit nicer. You could probably do some cool styling with like 0 states, 0 facts at the tops, and just make it look a bit nicer and more, I guess, aligned at the top. But what I think I would actually prefer to do in this case is just remove this entirely and then have it visible somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this and put a button in the toolbar that is going to launch a modal, and that can display your score. So if you want to see your score, you tap the button at the top and it's going to pop that up. And maybe it can also help give some extra context around what this means. Because if I was using this application for the first time, I wasn't really sure what it was about. I don't really know what this means at the top. So having it on its own modal gives you a bit of room to add some extra information, some clarification around that, do some nice styling, and also remove it from the header section here. So I'm going to quickly make that change and we'll see what that looks like. So it looks like we just have an Ionic grid here holding all of this stuff. This is something I do want to quickly mention about this code here. I don't want to get too much into reviewing the code itself, because it's not the point of this series, but I tend to avoid Ion Grid as much as possible. It's a very useful component, but I try to only use it where I really need it, because it can kind of become a crutch to fall back on, because if you use it for everything, you can kind of position everything easily where you want it, but there's usually an easier way to achieve it just with some simpler CSS. And that CSS is also probably going to just flow better and work better with the application. I would save using the grid for situations where you really need to have that fine-tuned control over where elements is sitting on the page. But again, I don't want to get too much into that. So basically what I'm going to do here is just delete this whole thing, get rid of that grid there. Okay, so now that is gone, which is fantastic. And we're going to put an icon at the top. Again, I'm not actually going to make this work. We're just going to design the interface for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this refresh button. So that's the next change that I'm planning on making here. Again, we kind of want to think about what the user wants to be interacting with and how frequently, how important particular elements are on the page. The refresh button, I think, is not an important element at all. Presumably, you're only going to be pushing this when you're resetting the entire game, which probably isn't going to be very often if you're trying to collect all of these license plates here. So having it in such a primary position where it has this really big prominence and it's there all the time, doesn't make much sense. I think we can move this somewhere else, make it less obvious, and kind of remove the importance from that button. So since we're getting rid of that button in just a moment, what I'm going to do is just replace that with our new score button that's going to allow the user to quickly view their score. So why don't we just bring up the Ionicons from Ionic, and we're just going to try and find like a badge or a score or something. Let me just have a quick scroll through here, see if we can find something that looks a bit like it would be a scoreboard or leaderboard or something. Probably like a star or a graph maybe. I'm liking the graph. And this is a problem I have. I spend way too long figuring out which little icons and things I want. So let's go with this thing. It kind of looks like a little podium It is podium. So we'll use that as like a little kind of leaderboardy type thing. So we're just going to replace this icon with podium. Ooh. Can't type today. And we can actually put that in the icon only slot to style that correctly for the toolbar. Okay, so now we have our button here, which is still actually doing the refresh function. I'm just going to get rid of that click function just to make that less confusing. But yes, eventually we would have some modal that could be launched by clicking on this, and that's going to display the score. And just another quick thing, just a little style thing. I really don't like the little borders on the toolbar here. I forget the attribute for removing that. So what I'm going to do is just bring up the Ion toolbar in the documentation here. And we're going to look at the CSS custom properties to see what we can control. So we have the border width, border style, border color. So I think if we apply the border width to the toolbar, 0, that will remove that border. So I might just do that. I like that style. That's kind of like just a preference thing for me, really. You might prefer having that border there. But I'm going to actually just chuck that into the global CSS file here. We'll say Ion toolbar, and we'll set that border width to 0. I just think that looks a little bit nicer. Isn't actually getting the precedence here because this one is actually overriding that, because that is a more specific rule. So just to make sure that we do get it, we can actually just copy that directly. We'll use that, oops. We want that exact selector there, and then we know that we're targeting the right thing with the right kind of level of importance there. Now we do have that border gone. Okay, so let's move on. Now that that's done, I don't want to spend too much time on little stuff like that. So we need to put that refresh back, because we got rid of that refresh button. We need to actually make sure that's still in here in some degree. I think it would look good putting it in just the top here. And so when you scroll down, won't be there, but we'll have just a kind of secondary style button at the top that you can click to restart the game. So let's do that. And again, we have this grid here, which, yeah, I just said I'd probably prefer not to do, but I'm probably not going to worry about that just yet. So let's say Ion button expand equals full, fill equals outline. We'll probably use the light color for this. I don't actually know what the light color is set to in this application, but we'll see what that looks like. And we will say restart game. That seems good enough for now. I guess you can change the terminology a bit, but okay, so that's the kind of the thing I was going for there. It's a little bit like I really can't see that there. I might actually just leave that for now, because I'm actually planning on changing the background color, which I suppose now is a good time to do that. I think it's a good idea to sort of have a different, slightly kind of off-white background color, especially in this situation where we have these white cards as well. It's just going to give a bit more prominence to the cards, make them stand out a little bit more than they are currently. So I might do that, and then we'll figure out how to make this restart game a bit more visible, because you can barely see that at all at this point. And now that I think about it also, I might put that at the bottom, I think, to make that even less prominent. And it'll make the top of the application look a bit nicer. We can get straight into those license plates. So scroll down, and that is how you'll restart the game now. Not totally obvious, but again, it's a consideration you have to make, whether the user is going to be able to find that or not, or how obvious it needs to be. If you had a really long state list, it's going to be a bit hard to scroll that way, but it is also something that isn't going to be used often, so there's a lot of kind of gray areas here. Nothing's really certain. Okay, so let's make that background color off-white. So what we can do is again jump into this global CSS file here. What we're going to do is just target ion content, and we're going to make the background variable. Let's just set it to black first, and then we'll change that obviously. And we're going to need to change the ion item background to white for the cards, because by default they're set to transparent, so they will just be see-through, which we don't want. We want them to stand out. We want them to be white. So I'm going to save that, jump back in here again, and then we're just going to inspect the element here, find the ion content, get that CSS variable. So set it to white, and then we're just going to drag it a little bit into the gray territory, just a tiny bit. We don't want to make it like too obvious, just enough to kind of create that distinction between the cards and the background. So that seems like a good enough color to me. So we're going to replace that with a new color. And now let's go deal with this button down here, which is barely visible. Now that it's at the bottom, it's not such an issue if we make it a more obvious color. So rather than using light, let's just go with the primary color. I assume the primary color is the red that we're using at the top there. Yes, okay, so we'll go with that. I could also add in a little icon there, a little restart icon if you wanted, but not too important. And now we kind of get to the, I don't know, the main part of this, I guess, and that's these cards here, which I think could definitely use some improvement. All the functions are on here, but it's not super obvious, I think. This tag, for example, is the tag you click when you find the license plate. You spot the tag on a car. That might not be super obvious with this. You know, it is technically a tag icon, but it's more of a like a price tag rather than a vehicle tag. So I'd like to make that a bit more obvious. I'd like to just work with the spacing and margins and stuff here a little bit more nicely. There's kind of a lot of weird white space. This underline here. It all just seems a little bit random, and we kind of want to again highlight the important information, focus on that, and make this just a bit more obvious. And from looking at this, to me, I think the important things here are obviously the state name is important, the functionality of this button we need to focus on because that is an important interaction there. And the other important information, I think, are the miles and the fun facts here. You want to know how many fun facts have I answered or discovered or whatever you want to call that. And also the miles here as well. So this sort of first number is important because it's going to be the differing information between the cards. But the actual fun facts label and the miles label, it's the same for every single card. So it's not something we need to draw as much attention to. So what I'm going to do now is just modify these cards. I'll probably just get rid of the grid entirely. And so I'm probably going to be breaking some of the functionality here because there is some sort of ng-if stuff going on, which I'm not going to bother to put back. But yeah, we're just going to focus on changing the interface here. So I'm going to do that. I'll probably do that. I'll probably fast forward through it or something, and then we'll have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so I've rearranged the card a little bit now. My main focus here was just on cleaning it up a bit, working with the white space and the margins a bit more, making it a bit more, just a bit cleaner, I guess. And I've also made the functionality for marking the tag as seen a bit more obvious by just having this button down the bottom here. And I've also highlighted that, you know, when a particular license plate hasn't been found, that is listed there. And I've also tried to bring more prominence to the unique elements on each card. So that's this variable number here that's going to change depending on how many fun facts you've answered or discovered. and the amount of miles, and kind of making the labels a bit less prominent. You might also notice I got rid of the state icon. I'm not sure if that was the flag or whatever that was, which does make these look a little bit boring. This is like a game application. It certainly should have a little bit of character and fun to it. But the reason I got rid of those icons is I wanted to try something just a little bit more wacky, I guess. It's good to have fun with these things sometimes, and as I just said, with a game especially, you want to give it a bit of character. What I thought could be cool is if we try to get the actual state license plates and use them either as a background for the whole card or maybe just this section here, I'm not sure. So what I might do is just go grab just one of the state's plates as an example and just see what that might look like. Okay, so I've just Googled California license plates here. I would advise against getting your images from Google Images because you don't know what kind of license the images have, whether you're able to use them, whether there's issues with copyright, things like that. I'm just doing this as, just an example to see if we like it or not. Justin, if you wanted to do this, I guess you would try and source these images in a proper manner. But I do have California up here. I don't know if this is the current Californian license plate style or not, but let's just use that. We'll just see if this is just going to be like a viable option for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to hotlink to that if I can. As you can see, it's not a particularly good quality image there, but that's fine. We just want to see if this is going to work. So what I'm going to do is shove this into the code, and we can have a quick look at what I actually did here. As you can see, I got rid of the grid, and I've just got some sort of standard card here, some divs and some spans using a flex layout. Nothing too complicated there. So what I might try to do first is I think probably set this on the Ion card content. So see if we can just use that as a background image. Looks like I've messed up something there. I missed the semicolon. Let me try that again. Oh, look how fantastic does that look. Obviously not, it looks awful. Let's fix that up. So if we use, forgetting the thing for background size, that's what we want. So if we set that to cover, and then we'd have to perhaps manually just make that card section a bit taller, just so that it fits that license plate size. For this to work properly, you're probably going to have to figure out something with the size of the license plates to make sure they're all consistent. But since I'm just trying to do this quickly, let's just give our card like a manual height, I think. And I forgot to actually set that to cover in here. So background size cover. So my original intent here was to have this as a kind of background image for this text to sit on top of, which we could still potentially do if we just make the opacity, or lower the opacity, or lower the contrast of the image, or do something like that. But what I'm thinking instead actually is I think it could be a little bit too busy and a bit too hard to make sure it works with all the different license plates. I think if we just put this underneath that other information, that will probably work just as well. So I'm going to get rid of that as the background image. And we're just going to add in an image here. Okay, so now I've just got it sitting straight above that button there. It is a little bit prominent still, I think. So what I'd probably prefer to do is can either lower the contrast of that image, or if we want to just sort of quickly cheat and do it, we could just decrease the opacity, just so it's not so prominent. Could go 0.2 or 0.3. Let's just go with 0.3. I don't want to spend too long here tweaking every little thing. So let's just say in here, we'll say the image can have an opacity of 0.3. And the benefit of having these images like this, why didn't that get the opacity? Ion card content. Oh, because I didn't put it in the content, of course. So I'll just style this on Ion card instead. Yeah, so the benefit of having this image like this as well is it does really make that functionality really obvious. Now that we have this marked as seen button and directly above it we have the license plate, it's very obvious what the point of this application is, at least I think so anyway. So we see the license plate, mark it as seen, and then this also gives a little bit of sort of opportunity for fun here as well, since when the license plate is marked as seen, we could also potentially increase that opacity a bit or increase the contrast, or however you want to do it. You could set that to be a little bit more prominent. So, kind of gives you that reward for finding it. It's nice and bold and bright now, and you can easily see that you have indeed found that license plate. So much so that you could probably even get rid of this not spotted, because it's kind of obvious, I think, if you were doing that. Obviously right now I just have every single one is California and they're all all the same, so you don't really get that effect, but it could be a cool thing to do. The last little thing I want to do here now is, again, this spacing here is a little bit awkward. So what I want to do is just make sure we get a nice consistent spacing there. We could cheat here a little bit and probably, what kind of padding does this have? Padding bottom, I think I should be able to just overwrite that. So we'll just change the padding there to 0 on the Ion card header, the padding bottom. So that do 0, and that should fix up that awkward spacing for us. And it does. So also, I'm probably not going to do it now just because I've spent quite a bit of time now just messing around with this, and I don't want this video to be too long. The state flag, the icon that was there before, again, I'm not sure if it was the flag or not, but that could still potentially look pretty good, I think, position up by the title here, the state title. So that might be a nice thing to add back in as well. Okay, so I think that'll about do it for this application. Obviously, we could spend hours and hours on this. I just wanted to make a few quick tweaks to make this look just a little bit nicer, perhaps a little bit more obvious in terms of the functionality, and also hopefully provide a bit of a better user experience as well. Again, I want to reiterate that design and user experience isn't something that you can just tack on like this at the end. It really is something you should put a lot of thought into as you're building the application. But if you don't know a lot about that stuff, just putting in that little bit of extra effort can have quite a big effect, even if it is just a matter of working on fixing up a few spacing things and making sure things are even, giving a bit more prominence to the important elements. So just fiddling around with the font sizes a bit and things like that. It can make it look a lot nicer. Okay, so I hope you like the result, Justin especially. Hopefully this looks cool to you. Maybe it doesn't, that's okay. Hopefully you learned something regardless. And again, if you do want to submit your own application for this series, you can, again, look at the description, send me your code, send me a screenshot and a bit of a description. And yeah, I might do a similar video about your application. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please do feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.